Hello, I'm Yelena, captain of Unit 2, and we are going to discuss how the framers created the Constitution. I would like to introduce my teacher, Mr. Swinehart, my two coaches, Mr. Trombley and Mr. Edmondson, and my principal, Ms. Chapman.
Hello, I'm Elliot Woods. It's an honor to be here.
Good afternoon. I'm Lynn Bajorek.
Hi, I'm Adrian Love.
My name is Lane Barton. Thank you all for being here this afternoon.
Well, it is our pleasure, and as you know, we're Unit 2 having the framers create the Constitution. The question of the day I know you're familiar with is question number 2, but I will read it for those in the gallery. Although posterity has tended to emphasize the work of the Constitution framer in the Federal Convention of 1787, the ratification of the U.S. Constitution in 1787 and 1788 was a landmark in the history of government. What evidence can you offer to support or dispute this claim? In what ways, if any, was the plan for ratification an example of social contract theory, and what precedents were established by the ratification process, and why have they continued to be important? You may begin.
The ratification of the United States Constitution was a landmark in the history of government for many reasons. First, the ratification process was unusually democratic. It lifted existing property requirements for voting and allowed all white men, with exclusions for age and in some states religion, to elect delegates who would attend the conventions, a first in American history. Second, the ratification debates between the delegates were held in city halls in full view of the people, unlike the Philadelphia Convention, which was held in secrecy. Lastly, the ratification of the United States Constitution was significant because it was the first time that the whole nation was involved in an issue. As historian Robert Allen Rutland said, the ratification process was unique in human history. Never before had the representatives of a nation discussed, planned, and implemented a new form of government in such a manner or such a short time.
The ratification process was not a milestone in the history of government because previous events had paved the way. The concept of ratification was seen before the Constitution in 1649 in England with a draft of the Agreement of the People, a manifesto of constitutional changes which required popular approval. The New Jersey State Constitution of 1776 allowed women who met the property requirements to vote. This was even more democratic than the ratification voting rights. Most importantly, the Massachusetts State Constitution of 1780 was created by a two-step process, being framed in a convention and then ratified by the people in town meetings.
The plan for ratification can be compared to some versions of social contract theory and not to others. John Locke's version, and his majoritarian emphasis for the creation of government, is related to the ratification process. In Locke's second treatise on government, he states, "It is necessary the body should move the way whither the greater force carries it, which is the consent of the majority." The plan for ratification required a majority of delegates in state conventions to ratify the Constitution in at least 9 of the states, which agrees with Locke's idea that a majority must consent. In contrast, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's social contract theory is less comparable to the plan for ratification. Rousseau believed that a sovereign person cannot be represented except by himself, and that the social contract is based upon the will of the people. This idea differs from what occurred in the plan for ratification, which was a representative process, not a Rousseauian direct vote of the people. Furthermore, the urban-centered allotment of delegates was not a good representation of Rousseau's idea of the general will.
The ratification process set many precedents which continue to be important today. One significant development during the ratification was that of political parties, which evolved from the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Though the two were only factions that disagreed on whether the Constitution should be ratified, they were still major foundations for America's first political parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Similar to the Federalist Party supported a strong national government. Also, like the Anti-Federalists, the Democratic Republicans advocated for strong states' rights. This is important because political parties have played a central role in government and are responsible for the occasional periods of hyperpartisanship.
Another important precedent was the process of ratification. The ratification process of the Constitution was the most democratic formation of a national government at the time. Since then, processes of ratification have evolved so that the commonly accepted means of ratification is through referendum. After the ratification of the United States Constitution, many states either ratified or amended their constitutions through a direct vote of the people. Recent examples of referenda are Iraq in 2005, Ecuador in 2008, Bolivia in 2009, and the pending vote in Kenya later this year. This is important because popular sovereignty has become a key feature in good government today.
Why do you think that the framers sent the Constitution to the states with neither an endorsement nor a condemnation? Was this a wise decision? Why? Why not?
Well, when thinking about why they would or would not endorse it, one of the key things was it was one of the same ideas of having a pseudonym of Publius when James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay wrote the Federalist Papers. When you put your name on something, as we see with partisanship today, oftentimes people get trapped up with who wrote it rather than what it actually says.
And I think an interesting distinction that should be made is the fact that the framers sent the Constitution to be ratified in state conventions, not to the state legislatures. In the convention itself, George Mason made a comment that the state legislatures would be the mere creatures of the state constitutions, and the state constitutions would be losing a lot of power in this new constitution because of the Article 6 supremacy clause, and therefore putting it in state conventions would prevent the state legislatures from not ratifying the Constitution.
Another reason that I think the Constitution was sent to conventions of the states and not to state legislatures was simply because if the Constitution had been ratified by state legislatures, many would not feel that it had any more authority than a bill.
And to go back to your question, I don't think the Constitution was endorsed because when it was in the state conventions, because it really was important for the Constitution to be debated and talked about in the conventions without previous things obscuring debate and just impacting what they think.
You mentioned the philosophical reasons for going to a convention for ratification. What about some practical political reasons? What was to be gained by going to this convention? One I just heard was that legislatures could overturn a ratification later on. But what are some other practical political reasons?
Well, I think one good reason would be simply because of the fact that going to the state conventions and it implies the idea that the state legislatures are not a part of the creation of the Constitution, and so they are not giving consent, nor can they take it away. Therefore, because the people are picking representatives of these state constitutions, it is held that the people are the ones who hold the power to give power to the government and take it away. I think you can see this as a good example in the opening phrase in the preamble, "We the people, not the sovereign states of the United States."
And to further expand on this, I mentioned that the Massachusetts State Constitution 1780 was drafted by delegates and then ratified by the people in state in town meetings. This was because 11 state constitutions were drafted in 1776 to 1777, and out of those 11, 9 of them were by surrogate legislatures during the Revolutionary War. People didn't like this because first it was by substitute legislatures, and second because it meant that the Constitution had no supremacy over regular statutes, which legislatures also created and ratified. And so that's why Massachusetts decided to do it like that, and I think they learned from those criticisms to do it.